This can be a tough passage because you're probably running short of time as you're getting to it. It's very science heavy, and so it's a little intimidating. But this is a good example of how we can kind of really dumb things down. And so we're going to use a lot of those strategies at the passage, but specifically for this first one, let's just make sure we know how to narrow our focus when we are given a question. We don't just read lines kind of blindly, we read them with purpose. We want to know what we're looking for. So in this case, the question seems very vague, right? And according to the passage, McGuire's findings regarding taxi drivers are significant because. The key word here is that we need to understand why they are significant. So let me show you why that's so helpful. So let's go to 8 through 12, the first line reference for 43, and that's going to be here. The right posterior hippocampus, a part of the brain known to be involved in spatial navigation, was 7% larger than normal in the cabbies, a small but very significant difference. Okay, so I get why that seems really tempting, right? It's a significant difference. Well, it's saying it's significant, right? So it seems like it matches. But they're not explaining why it's significant. It's significant because why? Well, it's saying it's significant. It's telling me what I know, but it's not telling me why. And so with evidence pairs especially, I talk about this in my study guides a lot. It's hard to explain, but you'll notice it as you do more questions. Sometimes they throw in these choices that I call what choices that tell me what I already know. But this question is clearly looking for a why. It wants to know why this thing is significant. Why is this true? And so this choice A is obviously wrong because it's not answering that question. It's not telling me why the smaller or larger hippocampus, see, I barely understand the science. The larger hippocampus is significant. It's just saying that it's significant. So let's keep going. Let's see if we can get a better answer, a why. 12 to 16. Okay, so that's right here to here. McGuire concluded that all of that wayfinding around London had physically altered the gross structure of their brains. The more years a cabbie had been on the road, the more pronounced the effect. So maybe this matters. It seems like the larger thing has to do with, like the navigating for a long time. I don't really know. I'm going to just write that. But it does seem like this is providing a why instead of just merely stating that something is significant. But let's see. Let's keep going. 17 to 20. That is here. The brain is a mutable organ capable within limits of reorganizing itself and readapting to new kinds of sensory input, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. Awesome choice, filled with tough science words, but not filled with anything of value to our question. This is clearly wrong. It's just trying to overwhelm you with science. None of it matters because none of it answers the question that we were being asked. Why is McGuire's finding significant? Didn't answer it. Just talks about brain science. That's all. D, 20 to 26. Last part. It had long been thought that the adult brain was incapable of spawning new neurons, that while learning caused synapses to rearrange themselves and new links between brain cells to form, the brain's basic anatomical structure was more or less static. McGuire's study suggested the old inherited wisdom was simply not true. So why is McGuire's finding significant? Because it suggested the old inherited wisdom was simply not true. Notice I can kind of just use the lines themselves to answer that question. So this also seems good. Old wisdom not true. At this point, I'm not going to bother trying to decide between line reference B or line reference D. They both do answer the question. So I'm going to see now, going to question 42, what matches best with the lines, right? So let's take a look. We got to be really picky here about these answer choices. The finding is significant because they demonstrate the validity of a new method. Well, in neither of these line references, B or D, do they talk about a new method. Maybe McGuire used one. I really don't know. I don't care because it's not mentioned in the lines, so therefore I have no support for this view, okay? B, provide evidence for a popular viewpoint. Well, no, it says the opposite, right? Line reference D tells us that the popular viewpoint, the old wisdom, was not true. So it's undermining a popular viewpoint. So this is just wrong. This is the exact opposite of what the lines told me. Choice C, call into question an earlier consensus. Now, a lot of people have trouble with that word consensus. That is a very important word. You need to know what this word means. A consensus is like wide agreement. Right? If there's a consensus about something, it means a lot of people believe that it is true. So, for example, climate change. The fact that climate change exists, there's a wide consensus, a broad consensus among scientists that climate change is real and the Earth's temperature is rising, right? So that is a clear example of a consensus. There are people who disagree for whatever reason, but the consensus, the majority believes that it is happening. And it is happening. But that is not the consensus that this particular study is calling into question. But here's the thing, is it definitely says it's being called into question that the old inherited wisdom was simply not true. And at the beginning of this, it says it had long been thought by other people that the adult brain was incapable of spawning new neurons. So the choice here is not getting into the science. It's more talking about, what people thought about the science. So that's okay. That happens a lot in the SAT. That seems like a pretty good choice. Let's look at D, though. Challenge the authenticity of previous data. That's very tempting, okay? The answer is C, and that matches with D. So why is line reference B wrong? It just doesn't have a match. That's really the only reason. It does not have a match. What's the difference between C and D? This happens a lot on the SAT, where we get down to two choices that seem very, very similar. And process of elimination is about moving beyond the feelings that we have about choices, right? Both of these choices feel like they might be true, specifically these two. But we have our task in process of elimination is to chop the answer choices up and really look at the specific words and phrases that are being used. And when things are very, very similar, we know that because there's only one right answer, there must be a difference between C and D. It is not a difference that just C is more right. It's a difference where D is wrong. It's actively wrong. So our job is to kind of try to figure out what about it is wrong. And if your vocab is not great, this might be tough for you. But consensus means, a people's opinion. But if we're challenging the authenticity of data, right? The data is the numbers, right? The science, the experimental results. So it doesn't say anything about previous experiments and previous results. It just says that people used to think this. It does not say that they thought that based on evidence, based on studies. More important, the point of McGuire's study was to get new evidence that makes people rethink the old way, the old point of view, the old consensus. What choice D is saying is that McGuire actually showed that the previous experiments were falsified, that people lied about previous data. So this choice is way too strong for this. McGuire is not attacking previous studies, previous numbers. He is creating his own new numbers, and those numbers make people change their minds. If you are challenging the authenticity of data, if you are falsifying data, what that means is that someone lied and the numbers are made up. That is not what is happening here. McGuire is not saying that the previous experiments were fabricated, were made up. He's just got a new experiment with a new point of view. So I don't know anything about the previous experiments. It's not in these lines. So I don't know if there even were any. I get why that is not obvious at a first glance between C and D, but once we kind of juxtapose these two choices and really start picking them apart, I would hope that you would notice that, and that we generally want to go with the weaker choice, and in this case, C is a little bit weaker. The vocab might get in the way here, but hopefully now you know that word consensus and you can get a question like this right next time. But yeah, this is a great question for really just sticking to the lines, knowing what you're looking for, breaking things down. Very classic SAT evidence pair here is a really good one to kind of maybe revisit when you're studying and the night before the test. Maybe rewatch this explanation because I think I hit a lot of really important points that'll help you on hard questions.